In countless post-apocalyptic movies and series, we often see towering islands of skyscrapers and monuments from our time. It seems like humanity, by the 21st century, has created massive and monumental cities, leaving marks on the planet that should last for thousands of years even if we were to disappear. But is that really the case? The problem is that much of what we consider indestructible is actually far from it. Take cement, for instance, an invention that's hard to overestimate. In the mid-19th century, people learned to make a powder from burnt lime and clay. This became the foundation of modern concrete and reinforced concrete, which, without exaggeration, is used to build nearly everything. The frameworks and walls of high-rise buildings, towering skyscrapers, dams, nuclear power plants, industrial structures, and bridges. Concrete is, without a doubt, the skeleton of modern construction. It's seen as a highly reliable and durable material. But have you ever questioned its longevity? If you have, you've probably come across estimates ranging from 50 to 100 years. The boldest prediction I've found comes from the All-Russian Research Institute of Reinforced Concrete. According to their data, depending on the grade and conditions, concrete's durability can range from as little as 5 years to a maximum of 269 years. So despite its impressive strength, the longevity of concrete is quite limited compared to dense natural stone or even ceramic bricks. From archaeological excavations, I can say that ceramic artifacts often prove to be incredibly durable. In fact, the oldest fired clay object we know of is the Paleolithic Venus figurine from Moravia, which is about 30,000 years old. Neolithic pottery and fragments over 6,000 years old are also quite common. These were made from clay and river silt and fired in simple open-pit fires. I've personally unearthed 12th to 13th century ceramic roof tiles near Alushta that looked practically new. Similarly, ceramic bricks from the 16th to 18th centuries, often found near the Church of the Tithes, were considered too ordinary to even count as artifacts. And let's not forget the brick walls of the Kremlin, which have stood for over 4 centuries. By contrast, more modern silicate bricks, under ideal conditions, are estimated to last around 200 years, while gas concrete products are expected to last between 50 and 100 years. So while numerous new construction materials have been developed in recent centuries, none have revolutionized durability. In some ways, they've even fallen short of traditional materials. For example, ancient building mortars made from clay or lime served mostly as fillers, while the walls were held together by their sheer mass, hence their considerable thickness. It's also worth noting that not every ceramic artifact will survive for thousands of years. It all depends not only on quality, but also on environmental conditions. Materials are heavily affected by moisture, which is especially destructive when temperatures drop below freezing. Water seeps into pores, freezes, and expands, causing damage. Temperature fluctuations are another harmful factor. For instance, the pyramids owe much of their longevity to their climate. In temperate zones, where annual rainfall is 10 to 15 times higher and temperatures regularly drop below freezing, the pyramids likely wouldn't have lasted even 1,000 years. In general, within a relatively short historical time frame, a few centuries, most modern buildings will lose their structural integrity and crumble. And if humanity doesn't completely vanish in some catastrophe, as is often depicted in this genre, the destruction process could accelerate. Speaking from experience growing up in an industrial Soviet city, I can confidently say that in hard times, people start dismantling their own infrastructure. Factories, farms, and other unused buildings were often taken apart for construction materials and scrap metal. The hunt for metal reached astonishing levels. In the 1990s, I saw massive concrete pillars and other structures broken apart to extract rebar. Steel bridges, pipes, and even cemetery fences were cut down. It got to the point where steel window grates from dachas started disappearing. People combed neighborhoods looking for aluminum milk containers or copper cables. Back then, the demand was partly driven by European buyers, who even opened joint factories to smelt Soviet scrap metal. Once the region ran out of scrap metal, these factories, like the Spanish-Ukrainian Intelspav enterprise, shut down. Tula, for instance, became a major supplier of scrap metal to the Baltics. Train conductors were cautious because active railway tracks often disappeared. However, in the event of a global-scale catastrophe, it's unlikely that one country would strip another's remains. The very concept of a country would likely vanish. It's clear that survivors wouldn't search for ore deposits, most of which are already depleted, but would repurpose the remnants of civilization. During one expedition, we excavated Bronze Age sites near an abandoned children's camp. The camp's existence was known only from old maps and locals, as 2 decades after its closure, all that remained were a few overgrown foundation remnants. Locals had dismantled the walls for bricks. Take Pripyat, for example. It's relatively well preserved, mainly because it had no nearby settlements and remained a restricted area. In industrial cities, though, many Soviet factories, plants, and railroads have vanished entirely over the decades, leaving no trace. And here's a curious, almost mystical observation people have made. Private homes, even if unheated in winter and without repairs, last much longer when someone occasionally visits them. But once abandoned, a house deteriorates at lightning speed. Speaking of durable materials, many bring up the infamous plastic. However, most plastic items, like polyethylene bags, last only a century or 2 at best. Denser plastics might outlast city ruins and survive up to 7 centuries. Still, in the context of our species' hundreds of thousands of years of history and over 5 millennia of civilization, that's not so impressive. Strangely enough, in 1,000 years, the main evidence of our civilization may be shards of broken ceramic, porcelain, and glass items. These materials can endure tens of thousands of years, but without excavation or research, recognizing the traces of a technologically advanced society would be nearly impossible. This raises a valid question. How do we find metal objects that are over 2,000 years old? Well, the preservation of metal in soil is a complex matter. Different soil types have varying acidity and composition. In one area, metal can survive for millennia. In another, it deteriorates in decades, or even years. Burial mounds often preserve objects well, especially if placed in sealed chambers, surrounded by clay devoid of organic matter, or buried in oxygen-deprived peat bogs. In fact, wood sealed in clay chambers can last thousands of years, although it rapidly degrades once unearthed. Roughly speaking, there's a general scale for corrosion resistance. Modern iron typically corrodes at about 1/10 of a millimeter per year, roughly 1 centimeter per century. But that's just an estimate. In harsh conditions, even a steel rail can disintegrate within a few decades, or faster. Aluminum and copper aren't immune to corrosion either. While copper artifacts over 5,000 years old exist, I've also come across severely corroded copper wire that was only a few decades old. The Earth's surface is constantly changing. Wind slowly erodes soil from one area to another, and water does the same. In some places, layers millions of years old are exposed, while in others, layers that are only a few centuries old cover many meters of soil. In some regions, building foundations will be exposed and crumble. In others, they'll be buried under thick layers of earth. Either way, structures will vanish from the surface. Post-apocalyptic cityscapes, the abandoned ruins we often imagine, are likely to be visible only for a few centuries after a catastrophe. After that, nature will quickly take over, and in about 1,000 years, traces of modern civilization will be rare. And this raises a reasonable question: what will be left of us? The answer is similar to what we see with building materials. On one hand, modern humans consume a lot of preservatives, and some believe this will slow the decomposition of our soft tissues compared to our ancestors. On the other hand, bone density depends on physical activity and nutrition. While it might seem like we have better diets than people in the past, that's not entirely true. Greenhouse vegetables and farmed meat are grown as quickly as possible. Breeding new strains and breeds often focuses on increasing the quantity and speed of production rather than quality. In 2004, researchers from the University of Texas conducted a study and found that modern foods contain fewer vitamins and minerals compared to samples from the early 20th century. For instance, calcium in cabbage has decreased by 85%. Even dairy products are more dairy-like than actual dairy these days. The physical activity and loads that affect bone strength in the average modern person aren't ideal either. When researchers discover Bronze Age skeletons, they're often found in deep burial mounds surrounded by clay. These skeletons usually belong to the elite, people tied to warfare who likely led active lives and ate well. I've worked with hundreds of medieval skeletons in good condition, and such finds aren't rare. Still, I suspect that most of our remains will last only a few centuries, not millennia. Reflecting on this video's topic, I've come to a peculiar conclusion. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the less durable its creations. And it's not just about planned obsolescence that turns our gadgets into trash within years. Many modern building materials and substances simply can't compare in durability to natural stone, glass, or ceramics. On the flip side, materials are meant to age and degrade, making way for newer, better ones. Life in a durable but cold stone castle isn't exactly cozy. More importantly, though, progress in technology and materials should go hand in hand with societal development. Hopefully, just as feudalism replaced slavery and capitalism replaced feudalism, humanity will climb many more steps of societal evolution in the future, rather than running around ruins with spears and clubs on the rapidly decaying ruins of our civilization.